Well, just to kind of crystallize everything we talked about with the New York Times article, hopefully people have had a chance to read it. I'm gonna link it below because I think we really should be aware of the criticisms of Bitcoin out there so that we can formulate, our responses. Some of us are headed to DC to talk to policymakers to make sure they really, really understand. So, zooming out before we start to wrap up, give me like the three biggest things. If you read this article or you're thinking about reading it, the three things that you really want people to know in light of that article, maybe the things that they got wrong and the big picture of what people really need to understand.
Yeah, so one, what they got right, which is that Bitcoin is a decentralized alternative monetary system that is global and creating value for millions of people and is growing. And eventually, I think will create value for billions of people. Um, Two is that the energy debate is really a debate about how electricity gets produced. And so, if we want to put a dent into carbon emissions, we have to focus on developing small modular reactors, and all sorts of other alternatives to coal and natural gas. Um, and that there's lots of renewables in Texas. Texas has more renewables than any other state. Um, and that with these renewables, because they are so unreliable, it's really important to have a demand response mechanism on the consumption side. And Bitcoin miners are ideally suited to do that. And the article even highlights that they say, hey, look, these facilities, they turn their electricity off 99%. Whereas a factory can only turn off 30%, for example, which gives them an unfair advantage. It's like, no, this is good. This is a competitive advantage for demand response. So this demand response from Bitcoin mining is good. And third, there's no subsidies here. This is purely a market-driven process, and it is about making sure that there's supply and demand that is balanced for electricity in the ERCOT market, and there's no subsidy from taxpayers or from ratepayers.
I asked these journalists if they would come on the show. I haven't heard back yet, but if you could talk to these writers that wrote this story, what would you say to them or ask them?
I mean, I'd say to them, like, why do you need to add the twist, right? For example, adding the smog to the picture. Um, you know, if the facts are on your side, couldn't they just stand on their own? Why do you need to kind of dial up the spin rather than just portraying it accurately? Because ultimately, even from their perspective, right, it undermines their persuasiveness when they do obvious spin like this, and it undermines their credibility. So um, I think they're doing a disservice to the good faith criticisms of Bitcoin mining by engaging in these practices. And I want to understand, like, why, what's going on here.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some other topics just before we wrap up,
Yeah.
because last time I had you on the show, you said that you were working to try to lobby the government not to sell its Bitcoin. I think at the time you said that federal government had like 70,000 Bitcoins. I know some have been auctioned off already, but where are we at with that? And why do you feel that the government should essentially have a reserve of Bitcoin?
Yes, so they are auctioning them off. Sadly, I failed in my efforts to lobby against that. The reason why I think it's important is really the same reason why I think that individuals should hold Bitcoin and corporations should hold Bitcoin as part of their treasury strategy. It's about having a strategic reserve where you have a decentralized alternative to, for example, the United States has a strategic petroleum reserve. So then when the price of gasoline is very high, they're able to sell oil. Or if we were to go to war, we would have a cushion of raw material in order to engage in armed conflict. Same thing, the United States has a gold reserve, Fort Knox, and under the New York Fed. Now, I haven't audited that, so I don't know if that's real or not. But third, massive reserve of land, right? Of federal land that is, occasionally leased out, but for the most part held kind of in trust for future generations. So it's really about hedging and saying, hey, look, we don't know what the future holds. What we do know is that Bitcoin, because it's decentralized, it has the least uncertainty. It's actually the lowest risk. If we just focus on the price, it looks very high risk. But if we zoom out and look at the software engineering and the fundamentals of the system, it's actually very low risk. And so that's where I think it makes sense for the government to have a strategic reserve of Bitcoin in order to hedge against future uncertainty.